Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to week 10 in CU 122. Chef Suzanne and I welcome you to another fine live session here at Escoffier. Hey, we saw some good stuff in week 10, some nice French loaves coming through, and I know that Chef Suzanne has a very nice PowerPoint put together. However, ladies and gents, we need to make sure that we're not putting the brakes on as we're ending the nearing the end of this course. We need to make sure that we stay on track. Your learning goes on and on and on, so don't put on the brakes and don't deprive yourself of the opportunity to lose something. We did have a decline in our on-time submissions last week, which means a lot of people are submitting late or not getting their work done on time. And we're all adults here, so we know that we can get it done in a reasonable time frame. So if you need help, make sure you reach out. You'll let us know so we can help you with your time management, which is a critical element once you get into industry. And then, ladies and gents, just a quick reminder, next week is our last week in this course. So we are here. We are at the dawn of the end. So if you have any makeup work or anything else, now is the time to get it in. Not next week, not at the end of next week, not the week after. Now is the time to turn it in. And if you're concerned about your grade, make sure you reach out and you talk to us, because we're here to help you succeed. And that's what our number one goal is. So just reach out, pick up the phone, give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us a message. Chef Suzanne Lasagna, week 10.
Week 10, it was a good week. There were some struggles this week. I think it was more folks were getting in their own head a little this week. But I will say this week there were a lot of late in the day submissions. So I saw a lot of struggles with stuff coming in. So this is a really good example of a week where you could not put off the assignment until Tuesday night. You had to ferment, you had to proof, you had to mix, and this is going to happen again this week too, week 10. We're breading it up again, so this is not a good week to put it off. Get it done early, that way if you struggle or you have questions or problems, you've got time to reach out to Chef Warren and myself.
But this is all part of what it takes to become a professional chef, because these are the things we deal with on a daily basis. And just a quick note, I did have a couple of conversations with people that were struggling with the French bread. And my first question was, did you watch the live session? No. So
I think I said that a few times myself, Chef.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for being here.
Well, but I did see some awesome stuff. See if I can get it. There we go. I put this first because if there was one struggle I saw more than anything, it was questions or issues with what French bread looks like. And I think that was an issue with folks not being very familiar or comfortable with fresh bread or French bread. So they're thinking it very much looks similar to the one on the left, which is, kind of more of your standard white bread, traditional white bread. So kind of got a picture here that showed what you're kind of looking for as far as the interior. And I actually went so far, I didn't even tell you this, Chef, I actually reached out to, turns out, the guy who wrote the recipe, which was Chef Tom. I actually was just asking him a couple questions and didn't realize that he's the one who wrote this recipe. And so he had some tips and info for me to share. And I was like, oh, well, who better than the guy that wrote the recipe? So he had some wisdom, and I had some wisdom also to kind of throw out here. This was a really good example of measure correctly, even twice to be on the safe side. Kind of like when you're building things, right? Where they say measure twice, cut once, right?
Yep.
When you're cutting wood, right? So kind of like that. Make sure your measurements are accurate. They're even more evident when you are making a bread than if you're making a gravy, right? French bread. This is basically more about French bread than bread in general. So looking for crusty on the outside and nice and chewy on the inside. It's going to have some holes in it. It should not look like Wonder Bread on the inside. Now, granted, there are breads that should look like that, absolutely, but French bread isn't one of them. So if you cut open your bread and you're like, yeah, it looks great, it looks like bread. Does it look like French bread? or does it look like a hamburger bun, or, what does it look like? So there's different, just because you had an issue with that, it's okay. That's why you keep trying these things. One of the biggest issues I think that I saw is a lot of pale bread. Crank that oven up and leave that bread in the oven. Don't second guess yourself. Good news is French bread has no added sugar, so it's very hard to burn. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to overcook it, you need to cook it longer. That outside is going to get crunchy when you do that, and that inside is going to that moisture is going to evaporate. It's going to start to dry out and get you that chewy texture on the inside. So next part is basically from Chef Tom, the writer of this amazing French bread recipe. Biggest challenges that he sees from beginners: under fermenting your bread, under developing the dough, under proofing, under baking. See that, like the pattern? Under, right? Lots of under. Not having your oven preheated or high enough, right? So the only problem is overthinking. So trust the recipe, trust the technique. You guys can do this. And I can honestly say I didn't see any horrible bread that I was just like, oh, that's just so bad. If you had struggles, y'all had little struggles, which means that your next breads are going to be even better than the one before it. You're all on the right path. So on to some photos from this week. And I did send out more messages and hadn't heard back. So I don't have a huge presentation this week, but I did see some amazing bread. Look at the interior of Makisha's bread. Look at that, Chef.
Rocket. That is outstanding.
Isn't that nice? And Feliciana here with her amazing bread. It looks like, a advertisement for a bakery.
It does.
And then I also had thrown out a challenge to do something with your French bread. So she made a soup to go along with her bread. She made some of it into, looks like a little grilled cheese, some French toast with like a blueberry compote on it.
Nice.
Right? And then here again, you see the before and after of the proofing and then the finished bread. And you're looking for, I think people were really nervous and worried about overcooking that bread. And this is French bread is one you don't have to worry so much about, right? You're looking for that crunchy on the outside. Isn't that nice?
That's gorgeous. Giselle did great.
Yep. And Nicole, she knows, I just love her mise en place. So I always have to show her mise en place. And then on top of that, she had beautiful bread.
Nice.
And Jennifer actually made one of her, I cannot remember for the life of me, but she actually stuffed one of her French breads. So the one at the very top has something in it, and then she did the other two just plain. And then I had forgotten about this till I started getting but I had said, hey, how about some pot pies? And these are just a couple. I know Donna made both of these on the bottom. She made like little ones with little bows, and then a big one. And then Joshua also made some pot pies. So I didn't want to forget to show those off. So we had some pretty awesome stuff going on this week. So I just wanted to kind of share all of that. So don't second guess yourselves. You guys are definitely on the right track. Bread is kind of intimidating. It's kind of scary. But you can do it. You can absolutely 100% do it. I believe in all of you.
Chef Suzanne, we have an extra credit option available.
I love extra credit.
I know. I'm thinking this week. I know you love to ask them to do additional things.
I do.
Right. You see where I'm going with this?
Do you want, have you got an idea, or am I going to throw out an idea?
I like your ideas, because I think
yeah. Then I have an idea.
All
so
right, what is it?
For the extra credit for this week, y'all have to make focaccia, which is Roman. So basically it's an Italian bread, which, as a lasagna, I'm kind of a fan of Italian, just saying. So for this extra credit this week, what I want you all to do is, just for fun, have fun with it. Don't overwhelm and fry your brains on this one. Take an extra picture or two of your beautiful focaccia, if it was, since it's Italian, being served at a big Italian family home-style dinner. Right? You're going to eat dinner somewhere during this week anyway. So maybe make some pasta or some, lasagna, and show this beautiful focaccia with some olive oil or some balsamic, or maybe turn it into a panini or a sandwich. So this is in addition to what you're already doing. Just do something fun with your presentation for this week. So you do all your pictures like you normally would do, and then put in an extra one or two. Set your table, have your family in the background, whatever. Go all out to present this amazing focaccia this week. Have fun with it, because it's a lot of fun. This bread, if bread can be fun, this bread is fun. Focaccia is fun.
Well, I love it. And I say we give everybody a nice boost to their final grade, that everyone that participates in this week's extra credit assignment, and Chef Suzanne, will you send a message after the class specifying? So we're going to take our focaccia bread and we're going to picture it on a buffet as a part of a buffet that is featuring whether it be Northern or Southern Italian cuisine, because I think the more varieties you have, the happier Chef Suzanne will be. And then we'll go ahead and we'll boost everybody's grade that participates. How does everybody like that? Is that a good idea? Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Yeah? All right, ladies and gents, let's do it. I love it. And ladies and gents, I just want to point out one thing. All of the under fermentation, the under development, and the undercooking of the bread is all in direct relation to time management. A lot of those things happen when you are trying to get it done very, very quickly. Ladies and gents, it doesn't work that way in the world of culinary arts. You have to manage your time. Time management is a critical element. So it's something we all need to work on and keep improving. When I was a younger chef, I struggled in that area tremendously. It took a few years and a lot of practice, so start working on it. So ladies and gents, let's move forward to week 10 and take a look at what we've got going on here in CU 122. Week 9 was awesome, ladies and gents, other than we were a little lower on our on-time submission. So let's bring that up. And then finish strong, ladies and gents. We are in the final swan song of this class, and we want to finish very, very strong. The more effort you put into this today, the stronger you're going to be in the future. Now is the time to submit those makeups. Chef Suzanne and I become very, very busy at the end of the block. We're trying to wrap up this class and begin a new class. And unfortunately, there is a cutoff time, which is 1 week from next Wednesday for the makeup assignments. We cannot take any more after that. It is donezo, over. So now is the time to get them in so we can work with you to help you get a great grade. And then don't forget, ladies and gents, the PowerPoint presentation for this week is already posted on the class page. So it is there and available for you. This is a super cool video. We're going to watch this for just a couple of minutes. It really describes what a good chef is all about.
Good morning. I'm Chef Ted Cutting. Now, why did I say good morning? I said good morning because while everyone else is sleeping in their beds, you're putting this on and you're going to work. I'm here to give you a day in the life of being a chef. And I'm going to break it down into 3 things. The first thing is passion. Second thing, discipline. The last thing, aspiration. Passion cannot be taught. Passion is something that you've always had. Here's my breakdown for passion. You can't tell a great painter how to paint. You can't tell a great writer how to write a book. And you can't tell a great musician how to play. You see, you already had this in you. This was something that you were born with. And if your passion is driven towards making great food, you must have made something already for someone to say, wow, that's the best I've ever had. And that gave you the bug. Folks, that's passion.
And that's the important part that I wanted everybody to see. Make sure you keep that passion alive. It's a long, long process, ladies and gents. There's no instant gratification in the world of culinary arts. It takes work, it takes discipline, and it takes aspiration to succeed. So make sure you keep that at the front of your plate. It helps you in the long run. Make this a priority. Taking a look at week 10. Research materials, make sure you read them, you learn them. We are working on focaccia bread again this week. And a lot of the stuff that Chef Suzanne talked about a few moments ago is very applicable to this assignment as well, especially the time management piece which will always be around. 2 knowledge checks this week. Live session. Thanks for being here, everybody. And then focaccia in the kitchen. Make sure on Thursday, sit down, read your research materials, complete both knowledge checks. Hey, and remember, you can take those knowledge checks as many times as you like, and only the highest score will stick. And then on Friday, sit down, read and understand the assignment, create a prep list, timeline, mise en place. Do that on Friday. You'll be set. Hey, you heard him what he just said in the video. Discipline is what it takes. Make time. And then on Saturday, prepare and submit the assignment. Check it to ensure it's complete. And then submit it. And then resubmit as suggested by Chef Suzanne on Monday or Tuesday. And then be your amazing self every single day. Isn't that right, Chef Suzanne?
It is. I didn't want to give a challenge for the dinner this week, but it looks like I sort of already did. It's built into the extra credit now.
Hey, how'd you get looped into that?
I don't know. I'm okay with that, though.
All right. All right, ladies and gents, here's a quick look at your week 10 conversions chart. This, my friends, will be something you will be using on a regular basis once you're in industry. And you have to remember that our #1 priority in the world of culinary arts is generating profit. And a lot of that has to do with the materials that we are working with and the quantity of materials that we are working with. So in order to effectively manage your kitchen, you really need to know your conversions. It's very, very important. So make sure you focus on those. All right, we are going to delve into focaccia bread. And focaccia bread is used making a dough called a straight dough method. Straight dough is a single process of making bread. The dough is made from all fresh ingredients. They're all placed and combined together in one kneading and mixing session. Unlike the French bread, where you kneaded it over a period of time, this is all bing-a-bang, bing-a-bang. After mixing, a bulk fermentation rest of about 1 hour or longer occurs before division. It's also called the direct dough method. So it's very, very important to understand that. And then focaccia bread. How many people are out there familiar with focaccia bread? Well, there's quite a few. That's pretty awesome. Focaccia bread, I love it. We use it to make bruschetta. We use it to make quite a few sandwiches. I love making grilled cheese sandwiches with lamb chopper cheese, which is a sheep's milk cheddar. It's absolutely incredible. And then what things have you done with focaccia bread, Chef Suzanne?
Oh, yeah, I'm also a big fan of sandwiches with it, paninis in particular, because it's got so much olive oil and rich flavors in it. I also like to try different toppings as it is. Maybe throw some jalapenos on it or in it, along with the onions, maybe some different herbs, whatever I've got. So there's just pizza out of it. There's just so much you can do with it.
Yeah. We've taken it, we bring it to almost to the point where it freezes, and then we put it onto our slicer and cut it into real long, thin strips. They're only that thick because that's the thickness of the focaccia, and about that long. Then we brush it with olive oil, toast it, and then serve it with our soups. And it makes a absolutely wonderful, real long, funky croissant that people really enjoy looking at. So
that's delicious, Chef.
That's creative, huh?
That's awesome. What kind of soup does it go with, just out of curiosity? Like tomato?
Definitely a broth soup. Like a roasted corn, and chicken and fusilli or something like that.
That sounds so good.
I know. Now I'm hungry. It's messing me up. All right, focaccia. It's a type of Italian yeast bread. We do cook this off in sheet pans, and it's flavored with olive oil, sometimes topped with other vegetables. You see quite a few times the focaccia bread, they'll actually shove like artichokes or Kalamata olives or roasted peppers into the top of the dough, sporadically, not a lot, or they'll brush it with a pesto as well, or they'll do rosemary and pecorino romano over the top after they brush it with olive oil. So this is a really versatile bread that actually becomes the centerpiece of the table. So it's a very, very important dish, and it's also extremely easy to work with. Ladies and gents, did anybody have problems with yeast last week? Anybody? No? Everybody's bread proofed okay?
I can actually say I didn't see a lot of issues with yeast. You know, I feel like for the most part, everybody kind of got it. No major issues, which is great because that's normally can be a place where you struggle. So
That's awesome. This is a smart class, though.
mhm.
So that's expected. We talked about this a little bit last week. Just a refresher to make sure everybody remembers. Active dry yeast. This is the one that comes out of the package that you buy at the grocery store, about the size of poppy seeds. You're going to mix this with warm water between 90 and 100 degrees. It's what we call tepid water. That will make the yeast come alive, and it gives off alcohol and carbon dioxide. You know it's alive when it starts to bubble on the surface a little bit, so that's important. Then instant yeast is something that you add directly to your dough versus having to actually bring it alive again. So let's wander into the world of olive oil. How many people like to cook with olive oil? All right, ladies and gents. So when it comes to cooking with olive oil, we try to avoid any type of saute work with olive oil. If you want to saute with olive oil, go ahead and cut it with some grapeseed oil or peanut oil, which raises the smoke point. Olive oil has a very low smoke point. It begins to smoke right around 350 degrees. And when that happens, the oil becomes bitter and will add that bitter flavor to your food. And it also begins to break down all the chemical processes within the oil and leads to flame. So we try to avoid sauteing with olive oil. We like to use olive oil primarily for cold or garnish purposes, dressings, or serving it straight. Extra virgin olive oil, which is kind of the king. They refer to this as being the best olive oil because of the flavor profile and the color of the oil. The definition of extra virgin olive oils means that the olives have been picked and it comes from the first press of the olives. Usually that happens within the first 24 hours of harvesting. And then they do not use any type of chemical extraction process for this process. And then it must be defect free. It's one of the few oils that they actually judge according to the color and the taste of the product. So extra virgin olive oil, a couple of things to remember. Number one, it's very expensive. Number two, we use it where that taste is required, right? So if you're going to be serving a caprese salad, which is fresh mozzarella and tomatoes, and you want that nice olive oil flavor, bingo, use extra virgin olive oil. If you're serving Italian butter, which is olive oil and balsamic vinegar that you would serve to dip in your bread, then yes, use extra virgin olive oil. It's not something that you would saute with. It's not something that you would make ranch dressing with. It's very, very expensive. So extra virgin olive oil is what we use in a sparing capacity. The next type of oil after the next press of olive oil we get is called virgin olive oil. And it must have an acidity level of 2% or less. That means that the flavor profile is going to be much lower. And its intensity is not nearly what it is of extra virgin olive oil. So they'll press all the olives at the first pressing, generally 24 hours after harvest. And then the best stuff that comes out becomes extra virgin olive oil. And if it has a lower acidity level, then it will become virgin olive oil. And then one of my favorite oils to work with is pomace olive oil. And pomace is from the final press of the oil. And it's got a light color and it's also got a light flavor, but it's a great general purpose oil to work with. It's a lot less expensive than extra virgin olive oil. And it doesn't really have the omega-3 fatty acids or the antioxidants that we look for in some oils, but you still do get some of the flavor profile. So that can help. Does anybody have any questions about olive oil? Chef Suzanne?
No questions so far. I've been trying. They're just hanging on every word. I've been trying to it was like pulling teeth over here in the chat. Like, hey, y'all, talk to me.
That's getting serious, isn't it?
They are very serious today. They're all about some olive oil and focaccia today.
It's just oil. That's all it is. Just oil. Olives that get pushed and they make oil. That's all it is. So, ladies and gents, just remember, extra virgin olive oil, first pressing within 24 hours of harvest. They do monitor the temperature. It's very, very important. If the oil does not meet the quality and the acidity level, then it becomes virgin olive oil. And then we have pomace olive oil. So pomace is really a lot what you buy when you buy olive oil in the grocery store. That's just another fancy name that we can charge a few more dollars for. So that's the story of olive oil. I think Spain is the world's largest producer of olive oil. And they're also one of the largest consumers of olive oil. So it's a very big part of their diet. Ladies and gents, let's take a look at focaccia bread. This week, your recipe. Remember, this is called a straight dough. So that means all the ingredients go into the bowl at the same time. So combine all ingredients in a bowl using a rubber spatula until the dough forms, right? It doesn't need to be smooth. It can still have little bits of this and that in it. So you just want to combine that dough until you bring it all together. And then you're going to lightly dust your work surface with flour. And you're going to take the dough out of your bowl, put it onto your floured work surface, maybe a little bit of flour over the top, light, because you can always add more flour, but you can't take it out. And then you're going to do the fold again, just like we did with the French bread. The rectangular fold, stretch it out, fold it in, stretch it out, fold it in. And then you're going to put that dough back in the bowl, and you're going to let it hang out for about 30 minutes and kind of rest. And then you'll repeat that process a couple more times. Or there's also another option as well. And after you get done mixing it, you can just cover it and put it in your refrigerator overnight and allow it to ferment, which is a process that we use quite a bit in industry, especially with pizza doughs, to bring the yeast and the fermentation process to complete. But speaking from experience, if you're going to do that, make sure you do cover that very, very tightly, because I've had a lot of doughs explode inside my refrigerator, and it does make kind of a mess. Now, when your olive oil is through the fermentation process, right? So we just talked, option A, pull it out, stretch it, book fold, pull it out, stretch it, book fold. You're going to do that at least 3 times, right? Letting it rest 30 minutes in between each time, or you can put it in your refrigerator and let it rest overnight. When you put it in the refrigerator overnight, make sure you do rub a little bit of olive oil on it, which keeps it nice and moist and prevents it from drying out. Now, when it comes to cooking the focaccia bread, you're going to put it out of the bowl onto a lightly floured surface. Lightly flour the top, very lightly, and then very lightly cover your rolling pin, and then you're going to roll it out the size of your sheet pan. You probably have a cookie sheet at home, I would imagine. That's probably going to be the most common. So you're going to want to go to the full size of that because the dough does shrink slightly. So make sure you expand it as much as possible. On that sheet pan, you're going to give it a light glazing of olive oil, which will prevent it from sticking. Once you've rolled it out, you're going to let it ferment for a couple of hours. I see time management all over this, Chef Suzanne, don't you?
Yes, and actually, to kind of jump back, I know I saw this week. Make sure that when you are budgeting your time management, you're thinking in advance. So, for example, I know I saw a couple students that were planning on fermenting in the fridge, using the option to ferment in the fridge, and then they got called into work, and it ended up sitting in the fridge for a lot longer, and then wondered what happened to their bread. So if you're going to do that, at some point it can affect it. So keep in mind that if you're just budgeting your time to ferment overnight and then you get called to work and you have issues and you don't get back to it for 3 days, probably going to run into some issues with that dough. So think ahead, which is great, but also think about if something happens up ahead.
Passion, discipline, and aspiration. Use it all this week for this week's assignment. So once you've got that dough onto your sheet pan, remember you put a little oil on the sheet pan, you rolled it out, put the dough on top of the sheet pan, make sure you roll it out big because it will shrink a little bit. And then you're going to allow that to proof or ferment for about 2 to 3 hours until the dough completely fills that pan. And then you're going to take these two guys here, right? Your fingers, and you're going to, first you're going to rub it down with just a little bit of olive oil, and then you're going to create dimples on your top of your dough. And we're going to take a look at how they do that here in a video in just a second. So you get your two fingers, your fingers go in about a ½ inch, and then you will gently sprinkle that with your fresh herbs if you choose to do so. Rosemary is one of my most favorite because it seems to permeate and create a wonderful flavor. You also see people putting a lot of sea salt or cracked salt on top of the focaccia, which is a nice touch and adds a lot of nice flavor as well. And then make sure, it sounds like we had a couple of challenges this past week with oven temperatures. As we mentioned last week, at Walmart and mini stores, I even think the dollar store sells oven thermometers. They're extremely inexpensive. Buy one. Make sure your oven is at 450 degrees. If it's too low, turn it up a little bit because this recipe does require that hot oven. Chef Suzanne, at the beginning of the class, showed you the picture of some underdeveloped French bread that looked a little bit more like white bread. That is a result of the fermentation process and the cooking process in a cooler oven. So you want to make sure that you get that oven at 450 degrees for this week's recipe. Any questions, ladies and gents? Anyone? Anything? Chef Suzanne, any questions?
I don't think so, not yet. No, we're good.
All right, ladies and gents, let's take a look at the video on how we're going to put this together.
Focaccia is an ancient Roman bread that dates back to 27th BC. It's a delicious and simple flatbread made with the straight dough method, meaning the ingredients are all mixed at once. One of the hallmarks of this bread is the outer texture created by baking in a pan with olive oil. To begin, start by mixing the ingredients all together to a shaggy dough. It doesn't have to be made smooth.
Everything in the bowl together.
This is a very high hydration dough, meaning it has a higher percentage of water in it. So it's going to be extremely stretchy, but also very sticky. Try to get a little smooth. It's not going to be really smooth at all, but just to develop a little bit of gluten at this point. Once the dough is rounded, you're going to keep it in the bowl covered with plastic for an hour.
This is where you allow the fermentation
After
process
that
to
hour,
begin.
The dough should be fully hydrated, and you'll be able to do your stretching folds. Release the plastic. It might stick a little bit to the dough. It's okay. And again, don't have to be fancy about it. You're just going to release the dough from the bowl. But you can see that you've really started to develop a lot more gluten just by letting the dough sit by itself. Stretch the dough out, and again, resist the temptation of putting flour down on the bench. You don't need it. You're going to stretch it out to a rectangle. Let it sit for a moment to relax it. Then you're going to fold it in thirds. Fold it this way, and then start stretching it out again. You're also kind of redistributing the yeast and the water in the dough. You'll start to see the gluten forming even more as you stretch it out. Round it before you put it back in the bowl. Plastic back on top. And you've completed a stretching fold. You'll be doing this technique 3 more times over the next 2 hours. It's possible to ferment this dough overnight. in the refrigerator. Or, to speed up the process, have the dough sit at room temperature for 3 hours. After the fermentation is done, the dough should have doubled in volume. This is the result of the CO2 gas and the yeast expanding the dough. Next, prepare a sheet pan with olive oil. Work it into each corner of the pan. It may seem like a lot of olive oil, but this will actually work its way into the dough. Using a plastic scraper, remove the dough from the container and just lay it right into the pan. Very gently, just kind of stretch it out to the corners. You can hear the gas being released as you stretch it. Turn it over to coat both sides with the olive oil. Now, stretch out the corners a little bit more. Even if it doesn't make it all the way to the edges of the pan, by the time you're done with the dough, by the time it is proofed, it will have filled the pan completely. Doesn't matter which side is up. So over the next 2 hours, like I said, it will fill the pan completely. This is the proofing stage, or the final fermentation stage before baking. Once proofing is done, preheat the oven to 400 degrees. Before putting it into the oven, massage the dough with more olive oil. Dimple the dough with all 10 fingers. Push your fingers all the way down to the bottom of the pan. This creates pockets for the olive oil to sit in, creating a more flavorful bread. Once the dough is dimpled, place the pan directly in the oven and bake for 30 minutes. The focaccia should be golden brown on both top and bottom. You can also check for doneness on the bottom of the pan by using a spatula to lift the dough out of the pan slightly.
There you have it, right? Make sure you understand that he said do not add flour to the to your work surface unless you absolutely need it. So you need to be cautious about that. Like we said a minute ago, it's easier to add more flour. It's really hard to get it out. Make sure you get the dimples in there. A lot of times in the industry, we like to put the dimples with our fingers in nice, neat rows because it helps the aesthetic of the product a little bit. But those dimples are to allow the olive oil to flow in there. I believe you're going to put 25 grams of oil onto your sheet pan. And like he said, that seems like a lot, but you are flipping that dough over and it is glazed on both sides. So be very conscientious of that. Does anybody have any questions about the focaccia?
Chef, I was just going to jump in real quick.
Sure.
This video is great, but it is different than the video that is on the class page. Currently on the class page has Chef Jennifer in it, so it is a little different. She does use the mixer in the video, so I'm actually glad you have this one because he does it by hand. So she does it with the video, so they're able to kind of see them both. But they're essentially using the exact same technique. He does more folding than she does in her video. But ultimately, what you're looking for is the recipe. So you're not required to use a mixer if you don't have a mixer. So you can do it just like Chef Tom just did by hand, or you can use a mixer. I know the requirement for the photo is talking about photos 4 minutes or something. And so just like this week, you do not have to do that. You will not be deducted for points if you don't have a picture of it in the mixer. You just have to have your mise en place and your after pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that helped with any confusion, but essentially they're the exact same recipe, just made 2 different ways as far as the equipment that's used, but it's basically the same.
One is by hand, one is by machine, right? And I prefer the hand method. I think it makes a better dough. And I think when you use the machine, you have a tendency to overwork the glutens and it comes out a little bit tougher. So it's definitely your choice. This next slide, Chef Suzanne, you know anything about this one?
I might know a little bit about this one.
This is a great example of some of the focaccia that's being worked. This is where they're doing the dimples right here. And then you can see how the olive oil actually pools into the dimples on the focaccia bread and what it should look like when it comes out of the oil. Do you know anything about this one here, Chef Suzanne?
That might be my husband who has like the biggest dimples in the world, and they're not even, this photo doesn't even do it justice. He sort of looks like the Joker, like all the time. All the time. And so I actually showed up to his work with some fresh rosemary out of the garden and some olive oil. And I was like, I'm going to need to take your picture real quick. Because Chef Warren had already made this PowerPoint. And so he had one that said dimples only, dimples with olive oil, and dimples with olive oil and fresh rosemary. So I literally had to go and take my husband's picture. And these will forever be some of my favorite photos of my husband. So I hope you all enjoy that. That's for my husband, for all of you.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Ladies and gents, and then just to explain the proofing process here, you know, that first video, the one that's on the class page, does talk about using a mixer. And this is kind of what you're looking at in the mixer. Once again, I prefer to do it by hand because you really don't need to mix the dough that much. And, you know, by the time you get done with the book folds, it's going to develop plenty of glutens. With the machine, you do run into the concern of overdeveloping glutens. And then to explain the proofing process a little bit better, you know, right here you have about 2.5 cups of the dough down here after it gets done mixing. And then you can tell how it proofs. And that's that carbon dioxide giving off gas. And then the gluten is holding it all together. So this is kind of an example. And then your finished focaccia, these are some of the pictures that Chef Suzanne is going to be looking for. You know, we talked about that oil and the way that affects the bottom and the top, and you can see that here because this is an excellent example of that oil and what it's done. And so you really do pick up a lot of that real olive oil flavor. That nice golden brown crust is something that we look for, that GBD, when it comes out of that 450-degree oven. If your oven is not hot enough, you're not going to reach that temperature. So be real careful.
Okay, Chef, there's a couple of questions in the box, and they're really good questions. Can you pull the recipe up real quick? I know you had a slide with the recipe. There is, I don't want to say there's an error in the recipe, but it's more of an omission in the recipe, so it can be a little confusing. Thank you. All right, so if you read through the recipe, it's talking about combine all the ingredients in the bowl. And so, but then later on in the recipe, it talks about adding 25 grams of olive oil. And so in the video with Chef Tom, you can see him putting the oil in there. And I just looked again in with Chef Jennifer's video, you can see her with the oil and she looks like she's pouring it in, but it's hard to see. So there should be 75 grams of olive oil going in. The 25 grams
is for the surface.
Is for the surface, and or like for the bottom of your pan and the surface. So they basically there should be another 25 grams in the recipe somewhere, which is I think causing a little bit of confusion. So there should be oil. So in the bowl when you start should be the bread flour, the water, the yeast, the salt, and the olive oil. That should all go into the mixer or into your bowl if you're making it by hand. And then when you're done with, you know, get it in the pan, you're gonna have some olive oil in the bottom, you're gonna put some olive oil on top. So that's what you're looking for with this. I hope that made sense. So that 75 grams is going in your bowl.
75 grams in the dough and then 25 grams for your sheet pan. Does that make sense, Chef Suzanne?
I think so, yeah.
All right. I gotcha. Let's take a look at our week 10 assignment.
And the cool thing about this bread, everybody, is it's very forgiving. It's very, I think this one's actually, I feel like we should actually have done this one first because I think this one's a lot more forgiving, a lot easier to work with and develop. So I think most of you will not have any issues with this one.
Nope. This one I think is a pretty easy recipe, but it is a great way to learn the technique of straight dough. So this week, make sure that self-identification photo is looking good. It's very important once you get into industry. Sanitation, bucket, all that kind of good stuff is required. Nice picture of your mise en place. Remember, the better that your mise en place is lined out, the quicker you can go and the more efficient you are. Dough mixed for 4 minutes. That Chef Suzanne just explained. If you're not using a mixer, don't worry about that because you are certainly welcome to do it in a bowl if you like, just like the video that we just saw. So just to make sure everybody understands this, there is one video that is on the class page under research materials that shows the machine. The video that we just watched is in the weekly presentation, which is on the class page. So you have access to both videos should you need to see them. And then dough before fermentation, dough after fermentation, right? So we need to see that proofing that takes place. And then the pan with the olive oil, the 25 grams of olive oil that Chef Suzanne just spoke about. Don't forget, 75 grams goes into the dough and 25 grams goes onto the sheet pan. And then dough on oil-covered pan, stretching corners. Make sure you're bathing both sides of that dough because it has to be covered on both sides. There should be some oil flowing down in the dimples there. Focaccia before proofing, after proofing, and then baked, and then after baking. Any questions, ladies and gents?
I had a good question in the box, so I'm going to mention it here. Someone asked if this was a hard bread, and I'm assuming texture-wise, and it's not. It's French bread should have been very hard on the outside. Say like a sandwich bread is going to be more soft. This is pretty much chewy all the way through. It's not going to be hard. It's not going to be crunchy, but it's also not going to be soft. It's going to be a chewy texture to it.
Should be able to push on it when it comes out. Yeah, it won't crack or anything like that.
No.
Remember what caused the cracking on the French dough, right? That was the water in the oven and that nice steamy environment, but we're not doing that with this technique. So great question. Great question. Any other questions?
I actually haven't had anybody ask this yet, but I'm going to volunteer it. The recipe says mixed dried herbs. Can you use fresh? Absolutely. You
Preferred.
can absolutely use fresh. I'm not sure why it calls for dry. Use either. Use whatever you've got. Fresh is always going to be preferable, but dry in this case will work really well too.
And you can do this as well. I don't care for herbs on the inside of the dough. I like the fresh herbs on top of the focaccia. It adds a nice aesthetic, and I think you get a better flavor profile because it doesn't flavor the dough, but you taste the herb and the dough together. But when you add the herbs to the dough, it creates one flavor, and I don't care for that. So you're certainly welcome to put the herbs on top. Don't forget your narrative sheet this week. It's extremely important. Once you get into industry, you're really going to understand why. It makes a lot of sense. Anybody else have any questions? Ladies and gents, great. Thank you very much for a great week 10 live session. We look forward to seeing everybody's assignment get submitted early. Time management, time management. Make it happen. Don't forget to get those makeup assignments in soon. Next week is our last week. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.